Most people who show interest in aviation, and especially around the World War II era, have almost surely heard of the early jets that were being prototyped during the war. But unknown to most, the US was developing a jet of its own around the same time, which also just happened to be test piloted by a gorilla. Don't worry, I'll get to that later, but first, let's talk about today's aircraft in question, the revolutionary US jet known as the P-59 Airacomet. The Bell P-59 Airacomet was the first American jet-powered airplane in the United States. It was a top-secret project that wasn't announced to the general public until 1943, and only after it had completed 100 test flights. However, even before the Airacomet made it onto the drawing board, Europe already had its own jet programs well underway. Germany's Messerschmitt Me-262, Arado AR-234, and England's Gloucester Meteor would all become operational during the war. In the Pacific, the Japanese also flew the Nakajima Kika at least once. I've already made a video on the Kika in the past, so maybe check that out after this video. Anyway, back to today's topic. Germany was the first country to get a jet-powered plane off the ground, beginning with the Heinkel 178. The first official flight was on August 27, 1939, powered by the HES-3 centrifugal turbojet, designed by Otto von Ohain. Despite the advancement in technology, these aircraft would be too new and too late to have any measurable effect on the war. It would take several more years to develop the full potential of the jet airplane. The P-59 had its inception on August 28, 1941, after Lawrence Bell, president of Bell Aircraft, was summoned to Washington, D.C. for a conference. He had been called to the nation's capital by General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the U.S. Army Air Force, to discuss the possibility of designing a single-seat jet fighter utilizing General Electric's A-1 centrifugal turbojet engine. The A-1 was an American version of the Power Jet's W-1 turbojet that had been developed by Frank Whittle. General Arnold was given the plans for the aircraft's power plant after attending a demonstration of the Gloster E-28-39 in April 1941. Bell Aircraft was chosen as the designer because it was less overloaded by aircraft production, its close proximity to GE, and Bell was also noted for advanced aircraft designs. Larry Bell accepted the offer and a contract was signed on September 30, 1941. Bell then put his engineers to work on the Model 27, as it was known inside the company. The Airacomet was described as radical in design, but only because it was jet-powered. Other than the engine, the airplane's design was quite conventional, and its performance left much to be desired. It had the Bell trademark tricycle landing gear, a straight cantilever mid-wing of relatively low aspect ratio, and conventional tail unit. The fuselage was flush-riveted monocoque construction with electric flaps and fabric-covered control surfaces. The cockpit was also pressurized and heated with engine bleed air. At the time, the Bell Company was working on a new fighter with contra-rotating propellers in a pusher configuration for the Air Force under the designation XP-59. In order to preserve the cloak of secrecy, the original project was cancelled and the new twin-jet fighter was given the same designation. The new jet fighter design was approved on January 9, 1942, and construction began in March 1942 on 3 XP-59A prototypes. Absolute secrecy was required for the XP-59A, and Bell engineers were moved to a former Pierce Arrow automobile factory in downtown Buffalo. Production was later moved to the second floor of a 3-story building, where a machine shop took the place of a Ford car agency. The building's windows were welded shut and the glass painted over. Guards were placed around the building on 24-hour watch. The first jet engine arrived in Buffalo on August 4, 1942, and the first XP-59A was ready for shipment on September 10th. To extract the airplane from the building, workmen had to knock a large hole in the side of the brick building, after which 3 large crates were lowered onto 2 railroad flat cars. To assure that the bearings in the engines would not be damaged by the vibrations during transport, an air compressor was hooked up to pump air to the engines to rotate the turbines. The XP-59A would be powered by 2 General Electric A-1 centrifugal turbojets, with a statutory thrust of 1,250 pounds. On September 12, 1942, the first XP-59A was sent to Muroc Army Airfield in California for testing, where it was flown for the first time on October 2, 1942, by Robert Stanley, Bell's chief test pilot. Flight evaluation uncovered a multitude of problems as the XP-59A tended to yaw and sway. Other problems were poor engine response and insufficient lateral stability during rolls. On March 26, 1943, 13 pre-production YP-59As were ordered. The YP-59A would essentially be the same as the 3X models, except that it would be a sliding canopy instead of being hinged. The first two YP-59As were delivered to Morocco in June 1943. The 13 service test YP-59As had a more powerful engine than their predecessor, but the improvement in performance was negligible, with only a 5-mile-per-hour increase in top speed. The third YP-59A built was supplied to the Royal Air Force in exchange for the first production Gloster Meteor 1. British pilots found that the YP-59A performance was unsatisfactory when compared to the Meteor. The Airacomet only flew 11 times at Farnborough, and it was returned to the United States in early 1945. While the performance of the Airacomet was not spectacular, one YP-59A did establish a new unofficial altitude record of 47,600 feet. The first YP-59As were powered with the earlier GE A1 turbojets with engines providing 1,250 pounds thrust. Later production models of the P-59B were powered with the GE5 engines capable of providing 2,000 pounds of thrust. On March 11, 1944, a contract was signed for 100 P-59As, and a further 250 were planned. The production model had a shortened wing, and all control surfaces were metal covered. The fuselage was straightened, and the tail was redesigned, incorporating a ventral fin. However, the contract was cancelled after only 39 aircraft were delivered, plus the additional aircraft on the assembly line, for a total of 50 aircraft. The total production was broken down into two batches of 20 P-59As and 30 P-59B-1. The Model B differed by adding 66-gallon wing tanks. Mock combat sorties were conducted against the P-59 with a Lockheed P-38 Lightning and a Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, and in March 1945 against a captured Mitsubishi Zero. It was discovered that the P-59 was outclassed by the current piston-engine fighters, and it offered no appreciable advantage over conventional aircraft. Most of the P-59s went to the 412th Fighter Group of the 4th Air Force at Morocco Air Force Base. But, unlike the Messerschmitt Me-262 and the Gloster Meteor, the P-59 was only useful as a test vehicle and as a jet trainer, and no Airacomets ever entered wartime service. A few P-59s were later modified as drone directors and manned target aircraft, with a second cockpit installed forward of the pilot's cockpit. A proposal was requested for Bell to produce an XP-59B version, which would have been powered by a single turbojet engine, where air was fed through inlets at the wing roots and exhausted beneath the fuselage. Bell declined the offer, and the proposal was taken up by Lockheed, which developed the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star. Although the P-59 did not contribute to the war effort, it was a window into the future of outstanding American jet aircraft that were just on the horizon. Now, about that Guerrilla. Although it never saw action, the P-59 was an important step in the development of U.S. air power. It was also a top-secret project at the time. The British had a jet fighter airframe in development since 1941, as did the Nazis. It was so secret, in fact, that when the P-59 was taxiing, airmen put a fake wooden propeller on her nose so onlookers wouldn't notice anything odd about the aircraft. In the air, however, it was a very different story. Pilots flying the usual piston-driven aviation engine would report back to base with sightings of a fast-moving plane without a propeller. They also said the plane was flown by a, quote, gorilla wearing a derby hat waving a stogie at them. The chief test pilot for Bell Aircraft was Jack Woollums, and by the time Bell was testing its P-59 design, Woollums had already served 18 months in the Army Air Corps. He was also the man behind the gorilla mask. Other pilots who were exposed to Woollum's prank were convinced by the Air Force psychologists that they hadn't really seen the gorilla flying the plane because, quote, everyone knows you can't fly without a propeller. Woollums was also the first person to fly a fighter aircraft coast to coast, non-stop, and set an altitude record in 1943. Woollums died preparing for an air show in 1946, but he was a man ahead of his time, a harbinger of the non-stop, record-breaking years of air power development to come for test pilots in the 1950s and 60s. What are your thoughts on the P-59 Airacomet? Was it a step in the right direction for U.S. aircraft technology, or just a useless hunk of metal taking up precious wartime materials? Let me know down in the comments. Sorry, I haven't posted in a while. I was recently pretty sick, and school has been keeping me very busy. As usual, you can click on more of my content above, and consider subscribing to my channel. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and can't wait to see you in the next one.